What's up, everybody? It's Nick Gase with Springboard Creative, and welcome to episode 4 of SBC Digest, where this week we are going to begin the arduous process of trying to fix the NCAA. For those of you who don't know, I spent 8 years as a Division I coach, and currently as part of my duties, I consult with teams and coaches around the country, so I'm able to lean on what they're saying and my own experiences to try to bring the best information and solutions to you. So, that being said, let's dive in. So we're going to call this part 1 of trying to fix the NCAA, and the way things have gone in the last few years, this could end up being 100 parts long. So stick with me as we try to move through this. Today we're going to talk about 3 separate issues, the first being scholarships, then housing, and then rosters. And there's so much going on right now, so many moving parts. We're going to try to offer some potential solutions. So the first thing with this is scholarships. And obviously this is getting blown up as you look at the Power 4 conferences. And now they're going to go to being able to max out scholarships for their new roster limits, though I don't think that's actually going to happen in all of the sports, where those not participating in this new settlement rev share thing are going to be kind of sticking to the older format where they have set a number of scholarships per sport. So we're going to blow that up because the first thing is that the NCAA is really just forfeited its ability to talk about or even refer to student athletes anymore because they have removed student from this capacity. They want to talk about it. They want to have these requirements, but they're not doing anything that is actually centered around students anymore. When you're talking about going from, Connecticut to Arizona for games or going out from Stanford to Miami in conference and making student athletes be gone for 5 or 6 days, that is not benefiting the student part of the student athlete. So they've kind of forfeited that. So if we're going to move in that direction, I think we need to take away the tuition scholarships. Get rid of that component, only focus on the other part of that. If we do that and we leave this alone, they still have ways as a student athlete to qualify for some academic aid. And that is obviously the first, if they can do it on their own merits. The second is going to be using grants or loans the same way that many student athletes do right now. And the third is going to be drawing on their new NIL funds and revenue share to push that back to the institution and pay for their own tuition. When you do this, you have removed the academic component as critical to their role as an athlete because we've already done that. So why are we still awarding them for the academics when we're not requiring the same things or recognizing the same things from them as a student? Second part of this then is that we are only going to issue room and board scholarships. And this is going to go for all athletes. So we're not going to have roster limits with, 30, but only 20 scholarships or something like that. If you are an athlete, you are on a room and board scholarship. But here's the catch. Everything is going to be on-campus housing and meals. If you want to live off campus, you are going to pay your own way. This allows a lot of opportunity to set parameters and bring people in and control some things while still issuing this aid for their experience. When we do this, we're going to have some savings by not paying for tuition, and there can be a couple things that we do with that. One is we can push that savings to covering the room and board for the additional athletes. So if you had 10 scholarships before, you take out the 10 tuitions on that and you push it towards room and board, which is basically going to be a 1-to-1 or maybe even a 2-to-1 if you're talking out-of-state tuitions. So you're going to have some opportunity to fill those gaps. And if you're in a spot where you're actually doing really well and you had all full out-of-state scholarships or these things covered, maybe some of that money can go back to reducing student fees, as we know so many athletic departments around the country are funded in part by the general student athletes' athletic fees. And so we can reduce some of those costs and burdens on the general student population if we find ourselves in a position where we no longer need those funds. The other way is that you could kind of push some of that into general operational funds as well. So if we are going to make this move, we've got to address the housing, and that's going to be all athletes living on campus. And I think the first thing you do is you go back to allowing athlete dorms. Now, a while ago, this was done away with because they didn't want to have some exceptional facility just for athletes that was beyond what the regular students had. We've already blown up this system, right? We know that this is not the case, that athletes are getting way more in a lot of cases than the general student. So let's do away with that situation. If you are an athlete, you now live in an athlete dorm. There's going to be some universities, obviously, that want to say, hey, we've got a living learning community. The nursing students are here and the theater students are here and those kinds of things. And I think that can be discussed. But in my opinion, I say you move into a single facility for athletes. Maybe everybody gets their own room, or you have some suites, some situation like that. You can make them as nice as you want to. You're controlling where they live and you are paying for this. The second thing this does is it eliminates this issue of athletes saying, hey, I signed a lease and then I got cut because of roster cuts, or something happened and I'm transferring now and now I've got this lease I've got to try to break. You don't have to worry about that. If you are an athlete in Division I, you are guaranteed housing at any institution that you compete at as part of their athlete housing. And the way to kind of make sure that happens is with roster limits, and we'll get into that in a minute. Another thing this is going to do is ensure security and quality of housing. And I know some people are saying the dorms are not quality. You can make them quality, and you can certainly do stuff to secure them more. A lot of times when we're looking at off-campus houses, you have the risk of breaking, you have the risk of a terrible landlord, you have, weather conditions that could hurt something, or, whatever that is. So by removing those external forces, you are controlling and securing what the athlete gets, because remember, as an athletic program, your primary focus is making sure that athlete is safe and healthy and available to compete for you. This kind of makes sure that we have covered the basis of eliminating any extra events that could affect that. And then we can also eliminate this issue that happens over breaks, which a lot of the public doesn't understand, but athletes are on campus training in the summer, over the holidays, Thanksgiving, spring break. And so a lot of times what they're doing is trying to pack up and get everything out of their dorm before they go to conference championships, because when they come back it's spring break and they can't get into their dorm, or it's winter training and they're a freshman and they got to be out of the dorm. So now they got to go find a couch of an upperclassman to let them stay there for a couple weeks, or teams are having to shell out money for putting them into, maybe other dorms or into a hotel or something like that. We can eliminate all that stuff. If you are a student athlete, you have guaranteed housing and meals 12 months out of the year, all the time. Okay. When we do this, we talk about the meals. So we're going to look at athlete-specific dining, which so many institutions are already doing. But what we want to do is make sure this is available to all athletes. And what we've seen before is, maybe football has training tables, but not other sports. Or maybe if you're on a full scholarship, you get the meal plan. But if not, if you're a walk-on or you didn't get that part of it, you don't get the meals, and now you're up to your own devices to try to find a way to fund your nutrition, and maybe you're not getting what you need to compete at the highest level for your team because of those limitations. So we're going to take that, eliminate that variable, and make sure that all athletes get the nutrition they need and guaranteed their meals. It's also going to let us control the nutrition better for the athletes to make sure that, they're getting the fuel they need, they're at peak performance. So, Purdue's got a new facility. Nebraska does it better than just about anybody in the country as far as, athlete dining. So we can really hone in on this and make sure that we are giving our athletes everything they need. I said a number of years ago that nutrition was the new forefront for college athletics, and it really is. So let's just make it what it is, right? If this is critical to the performance of the athlete and we are saying that athlete matters to us, then let's take care of that. And so the last portion that we're going to talk about today then is going to be the rosters and how this affects everything. So what we want to create is a hard roster cap for all of D1, not just these Power 4 institutions that are part of this new house agreement, but we're going to look at a firm roster cap for every sport, every D1 institution. I think it's going to have to be different than what they are setting right now, because some of those are really tight when you're talking about not having enough bodies for injury or illness or development or that kind of thing. So we're going to have to look at those numbers. But again, I think also with the scholarship changes, we'll be able to afford that. So every roster for every sport is going to have a hard cap. This is going to do a number of things. And the first is going to be it's going to create more parity, because you're not going to have a program sitting on 10 or 15 or 20 extra bodies, depending on their sport, where those athletes are really not even playing their walk-ons and they're not getting what they deserve there, but they're keeping them away from other teams. So it's going to push some of that talent downhill, so to speak, where they're going to have more opportunity to compete, and it's going to elevate those other teams because those bigger programs aren't hogging all of those. It's also going to give us the predictable numbers for housing. So that goes back to the last chunk, right? We know that we're going to need 450 athlete beds or 700 athlete beds, whatever it is. we can set that because it's not going to change year to year. It's also going to let us do that the same with our operational budgets, right? Because you know how many baseball bats you're going to have to buy for 40 people, or, you know, how many swimsuits you're going to have to get every year, parkas, all that kind of stuff, what your travel is going to look like when you're going, how many hotel rooms. You're not going to have this variable year to year, so you can control a lot more of that. And it's also going to set that scholarship spending, right? Because we know what we're getting every year. We've maxed it out. It's this. It's not going to be, well, maybe this kid gets a little more, or we need to do an out-of-state, or we don't have all the out-of-states this year, so we save some money. It's going to eliminate all of that. We're going to know what to expect year to year to year as we go through that thing. It's also going to return the status, in my opinion, of the D1 athlete, because I think that, you know, and this is going to be an unpopular opinion with a lot of folks, but I think we have sort of lost this D1 caliber athlete mentality in a lot of areas. And we have a lot of athletes that have gotten to D1, but they don't have, you know, maybe the mental tools or the physical skills to compete at that level, but here they are. So I think reducing these rosters, you know, from where they were a few years ago, setting these limits and letting all this stuff kind of move downhill is going to change that. But it's actually going to do something real interesting, I think, which is going to create a new demand and an increased value on Division II and Division III institutions. And so by doing that, this also helps those D2 and D3 schools, because they can increase their enrollment by kids who are no longer just, you know, getting onto a D1 roster because there aren't as many spots. So by doing this, they still get the opportunity to compete athletically. Those institutions can increase their enrollment and funds and opportunities that way. So it's going to do a lot. And, you know, down the road, we'll talk about some rule proposals that I have with transfers and how that would affect going from D3 to D2 to D1 and that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think this component could be really important as we move forward. So those are some things to think about for this week. I'd love to have your feedback. Leave a comment below, DM us, email us, whatever it is. We want to hear from you. Have a great week.